No one told me I was supposed to hate Dark Souls 2. I didn't grow up with these games. I didn't wait years for sequels. I wasn't there for the 2014 discourse. When these games came out, I was raising kids and thought with Halo Reach, video games had peaked. Dark Souls wasn't even on my radar. In 2022, I tried Elden Ring because a friend bought it for me. And after meeting this guy,
How you doing?
I immediately uninstalled. I went back to what was comfortable, games with yellow paint. Then in late 2023, thanks to some great friends, I decided to start from the beginning. Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3. But when I finished Dark Souls 2, I thought, that was good. Especially this guy. Then I opened YouTube, and apparently I was wrong. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized something. Dark Souls 2 was never the problem. We were. But let's be honest, Dark Souls 2 feels different. Yes, the movement is slower, adaptability is confusing, the world isn't tightly interconnected like Dark Souls. There are a lot of bosses, maybe too many. And if you fell in love with Dark Souls in 2011, that lightning in a bottle experience, and then booted this up in 2014, I completely understand why it felt wrong. Especially when you compare it to how smooth Dark Souls 3 feels. It doesn't hit the same way. So the criticism didn't come from nowhere, but I think we misunderstood why it felt different. Dark Souls 2 isn't trying to be a sequel to a legend. It's asking what happens after the legend is gone. In Dark Souls, you're living in the shadow of gods. Gwyn clings to a fading flame. The world feels mythic, ancient, purposeful. In Dark Souls 3, it feels like the final echo of that myth. Faster, louder, almost nostalgic. But in Dark Souls 2, the gods are barely remembered. Well, most of them. Velka still has a whole chapel and congregation hanging around. She's doing just fine. But everyone else faded, and that's the shift. Dark Souls 1 is about the fall of gods. Dark Souls 2 is about the people left behind. Vendrick isn't divine. He's a man who tried to outsmart a curse and turned hollow anyway. Nashandra isn't a god. She's just a fragment of Manus, a leftover consequence. Drangleic doesn't feel legendary. It feels worn out, disconnected, repeating itself. And that's not a downgrade. That's the point. I didn't come into this series chasing nostalgia. I wasn't comparing Black Knight weapons or remembering how it felt the first time I walked into Anor Londo. I came into these games later, in a different season of life, and from that perspective, Dark Souls 2 didn't feel like a failure. It felt reflective, slower, more deliberate, less about destiny, and more about consequence. By the time I finished, I'd seen what the Reddit trolls had talked about, saying it's the worst, and that I would hate it. But I didn't. Maybe Dark Souls 2 isn't your favorite. That's fine. And if you hate it, I understand why you feel that way. I just think you might have wanted a different game. And after Dark Souls, who wouldn't want another legend? Dark Souls 2 gave us what comes after the legend, after the gods, after the fire, after the myth. It doesn't feel heroic. It's about consequences, uncomfortable consequences.
I'm a pretty princess!
And maybe coming into these games later in life changes how you see that. When you're not chasing nostalgia, you start noticing theme. Dark Souls 2 was never the problem. We were. If you still think I'm wrong, I know I'm gonna regret this, tell me why. If you've come back to Dark Souls 2 years later and saw it differently, I want to hear that too. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this, especially if we're going to defend the Black Sheep. We've got a lot more to unpack, so until then, keep them peeled.